Jai Hind friends, I'm Major Gaurav Arya and you're watching the Chanakya Dialogues English. When everybody is going to be there, at the last moment you pull out, it gives a very wrong impression to the rest of the world that the United States now is a reluctant nation, or you might have any position regarding the Ukraine-Russia war, but the fact of the matter is that the Russians have stood with us. And nobody can deny the fact that the Russians have stood with us. Jai Hind friends, I'm Major Gaurav Arya and you're watching the Chanakya Dialogues English. Like this video, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to press the bell icon. And especially those friends who watch our videos but have not subscribed, I would request you to please subscribe. It motivates us to do better and better after each video. So Joe Biden has pulled out of the Quad Summit. Now I'm going to tell you what has happened. There was a Quad Summit, you know, the Quad, which has the US, India, it has Australia, and it has Japan. So these are the four countries that make up the Quad. Now the Quad is a very powerful grouping that has China slightly rattled and worried. You know, China does not want the Quad to be active. China actually is afraid in many ways of the Quad and the capabilities of the Quad. So there is the AUKUS, which is like the armed thing. No, it has navies and it has the Air Force and it has the Army. Essentially the Navy of various countries. There is the AUKUS and then there is the Quad. And Quad is so much more than just a weaponized platform. India has refused to weaponize the Quad as far as the Indian armed forces are concerned, but other countries, of course, are going all for it. I'm going to tell you what Joe Biden did. Great disservice, by the way. Great disservice. Anthony Albanese has confirmed that the Sydney Quad meeting will not go ahead after US President Joe Biden pulled out of his Australian visit to deal with domestic issues. Early Wednesday morning, Albanese was still hopeful that the meeting with the leaders of India and Japan could proceed with a senior representative from the US, but hours later he confirmed that the event was off. Now, the problem is that we are faced with this China threat. And that is why the Quad came into existence. You know, Quad might say anything on the face of it, you know. Members of Quad may say, India may say something, and the Australians or the Japanese and the Americans, we might say something else. But the fact of the matter is, this is an anti-China grouping. Let's be very clear about that. So is the AUKUS, by the way. Now, the biggest contributor to Quad is the United States of America. It has the most money, it has the biggest budgets, it has the biggest Navy, the Air Force, the Army, whatever. So it is the biggest player in the Quad. The problem is that when President Joe Biden, for whatever reasons, decides to pull out of the Quad, when everybody is going to be there, at the last moment you pull out, it gives a very wrong impression to the rest of the world that the United States now is a reluctant leader. The United States does not wish to lead. It is a weak country. So ladies and gentlemen, how do you think that the Chinese media is going to spin this? Think about it for a moment. How do you think that the Chinese media will give it a spin, give it a propaganda spin? Because all the elements of the media are under state control, including social media. They will say that America does not have the appetite for leadership. And there is an article, by the way. So I'm going to quote from that article so I can be more specific. They'll say that the US is racked by increasingly severe domestic upheaval and is an unreliable partner, quick to leave allies high and dry. Papua New Guinea was supposed to be there, and Papua New Guinea actually declared a public holiday for Biden's historic visit. And now they say that we have been thrown under the bus. So you see what US will do increasingly nowadays. It's done that in the past also. US has a very long history of betraying its allies. You know, a lot of Indians, ever since India, was this fast-track economy and, making so much of money and foreign exchange reserves and buying weapons, etc. A lot of my friends would tell me that, Gaurav, why don't we just go and align ourselves with the US, first world country, excellent infrastructure, superpower. The problem with the US is that the US is an unreliable partner. It is not just Papua New Guinea that they threw under the bus. They also threw the Afghan National Army under the bus. You see this entire thing, this entire construct about the Doha Accords, what exactly happened? I'll tell you. It was long decided that the Americans would withdraw and the Taliban would take their place. And this deal was brokered by a guy called Zalmay Khalilzad, who's now firmly in the Imran Khan camp. All right, he does stuff for Imran Khan. He takes money from Imran Khan and does all those things. In terms of meeting congressmen and saying that why don't you tweet in favor of Imran Khan? Zalmay Khalilzad has been engaged by the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf for building Imran Khan's brand image in the USA. Now, Zalmay Khalilzad was the guy who brokered this Doha Agreement, and he was one of the main architects of the Doha Agreement, in which both the Americans and the Taliban signed. It was signed in Doha, and the Americans said, we'll be off. That much was fine. But the Americans should have known that what kind of guarantees are they getting from the Taliban? Many people tell me who are in the know that this was a one-sided agreement, totally favoring the Taliban. Because the Americans showed a certain desperation to leave Afghanistan. No doubt pressured by Joe Biden's administration. They were desperate to leave Afghanistan. And anybody, when you sit down on the negotiating table, you can sense desperation in the other side. You can sense it, and then you tend to take advantage because people want to negotiate from a position of strength. And this is exactly what the Taliban did. US could have left in a more dignified manner, in a more structured manner, in a more calibrated manner. The US left Afghanistan as if it had lost the war and it was in full flight actually, for everybody to see. People were just running and they left the country in a mess, not expected from a superpower, an economic superpower and a military superpower, not expected. They could have hammered out a deal with the Pakistan that, optics are important in this day and age of social media and mainstream media. When the US went into Afghanistan, there wasn't so much of social media. There was obviously some social media, but it wasn't so active as it is today. They could have hammered out a deal. And what happened with the Afghan National Army? They trained, they operated with the Americans for so many years, and suddenly one fine day Americans left. And the Afghan National Army people, they were caught by the Taliban and they were massacred. Some people say in their hundreds. I don't have the exact figure with me. Many of them are hiding. Many of them have left the country. So it is not new for America to ditch its allies. One day they'll just make up their minds and leave. That is what America has done in the past. It hasn't stood firm. And this is something that America must correct about its, diplomacy, about its foreign policy, because there is no point in complaining that Chinese influence is growing. There is no point in complaining about it. I want to ask the Americans, what are you doing about it? Either you stop complaining or you do something about it. You're doing absolutely nothing. It was wrong for Joe Biden to pull out at the last moment. Sends a very bad message to the rest of the world. This entire number of countries coming together to tackle Chinese influence. I'm not saying it's about war. I'm not saying it's about military might. It could be vaccine. It could be trade. It could be commerce. It could be so many other things. Quad is so much more than simply aircraft carriers or various navies. It's so much more than that. And Joe Biden has dealt an irreversible blow. I mean, this is going to take a very, very long time to get over. You don't expect this from your friends, which is why, when my friends tell me that, we should buy American stuff and we should, in terms of buying American weaponry and aligning closely with the Americans, I always tell them one thing. Good or bad, you might have any impression or you might have any position regarding the Ukraine-Russia war, but the fact of the matter is that the Russians have stood with us. And nobody can deny the fact that the Russians have stood with us. Through thick and thin. There are two countries that have always stood with us. One are the Russians and the other, the Israelis. And we were the people at fault. We did not recognize Israel for a very long time, even though the Israelis helped us. That was wrong on our foreign policy's part. We should have recognized, we should have been friends with Israel long time ago. We delayed it. No Indian Prime Minister would go to Israel because they felt that a certain section of Muslims in India would be upset. And I always wondered, what do the Muslims in India have to do with Israel at all? And when the Prime Minister of India started going to Israel, there was no reaction from the Muslims. They said, we don't care, you want to go wherever you go, yeah. That was the reaction of Indian Muslims. There could have been one odd voice among so many crores. But no Indian Muslim came and said, no, why are you going to Israel and Palestinians are our brothers? Nobody said that. In fact, most of the Indian Muslims said, you're the Prime Minister, you can go wherever you wish to go. That has nothing to do with us. It's your foreign policy. God bless. But, we have ignored our allies for so long, and this whole tilt towards America. Yes, engage with America. I'm not saying cut off from America, but don't trust America, because when push comes to shove, America will ditch you. Take my word for it. I've studied this in great detail. America will ditch you when push comes to shove. So, Josep Borrell, he's the European Union Foreign Policy Chief. He said to the Financial Times, he said in an interview that India reselling Russian oil in Europe as refined fuel, he said this is not all right. And if diesel or gasoline is entering Europe coming from India and being produced with Russian oil, that is certainly a circumvention of sanctions, and member states have to take measures. India buys Russian oil, it's normal. But if they use that in order to be a center where Russian oil is being refined and byproducts are being sold to us, we have to act. So the European Union does not like India selling oil to Europe, which is Russian in origin. So what India does is, India takes oil from Russia, it refines the oil and it sends it to the European Union. If the European Union does not like India doing that, why is it buying Indian oil? I don't understand. Either these people are confused. You take a stand. You say that we will not buy Russian oil which is refined in India. We will not buy it. Communicate it to India and tell your people don't buy it. That's it. India is the top oil supplier to Europe today. The top oil supplier to Europe. And this is something that the Europeans have to ask themselves, deep inside. You're okay with buying Russian oil if it comes from India. You're not okay with Russian oil if it comes from Russia. So, typically, Dr. Jaishankar said, when he was asked this question, he said that my understanding of Council regulations is that Russian crude oil is substantially transformed in a third country and not treated as Russian anymore. I would urge you to look at the Council's regulation 833/2014. Now, essentially, what this 833/2014 says is that, when some material comes and then it's changed, so the basic character of the initial material is changed, then it will be, not thought of to be of that origin. So in this case, let me simplify it further and say that India is taking Russian oil and refining it. The act of refining it in India has substantially changed the character of that Russian oil, and it no longer remains Russian oil. That is the argument under this clause. That is what Dr. Jaishankar said. The Europeans are not happy, but Dr. Jaishankar is not impressed with the Europeans anyway. So that is where it lies. And but in his place, EU Executive Vice President on Competition, Margrethe Vestager, said that there was no doubt about the legal basis of the sanctions and that the EU and India would have a discussion as friends with an extended hand, of course, not a pointed finger. Now, after this gentleman, Joseph, did some damage, and after Dr. Jaishankar's response, hard response, now again the EU comes back and says, we want to have a discussion with India, we are not pointing fingers. So this guy was hinting at sanctions. Just imagine, now Europe wants to sanction India. Am I the only one who sees the comedy there, the funny part there, or do all of you also see it? Europe wants to sanction India. Imagine. Now, this lady says that Margrethe Vestager, she says that no, there is no legal doubt about the legal basis of the sanctions, but we want to talk to India as friends. We want to have discussions with friends with an extended hand, not a pointed finger. So the tensions have decreased immediately. This is funny. The next news, there was a group doing comedy, and they made a joke about the Chinese army. Now, obviously, the Chinese army can't take a joke. So these guys made a joke about the Chinese army, and something that Xi Jinping said about the Chinese army. They made a joke, and they poked fun at the Chinese army. Now, they've been fined $2 million. Yeah, these comedy people. They have been fined $2 million for cracking a joke at the PLA. Must have been the most expensive joke in the history of mankind. $2 million for a joke. So this guy, the leader of the comedy, this group comes up and he apologizes and he says, I'm ashamed and, I had no right to say this and I'll take it back and I'll make sure it never occurs again, blah, blah. And they made him apologize. Basically, he got a couple of phone calls from the thugs of the PLA. and the PLA called him and said that we'll not tolerate this. And the great PLA who has stood by this nation and sacrificed so much, how can you make a joke? These are basic Chinese, everyday Chinese things, how can you make a joke? And everything is controlled in China, including jokes. I'm not going to dwell much on Pakistan today, but forget about Pakistan. I'm just going to say that a US court has allowed the extradition of Canadian businessman, Pakistan origin Canadian businessman, Tahavur Rana. Now, Tahavur Rana is a childhood friend of David Coleman Headley, who was involved in the recce, the reconnaissance for the attacks for 26/11. He came and he went a couple of times, and he has been indicted. Yeah, he's now in prison. So this guy, Tahavur Rana, is a Pakistani-Canadian businessman. He gave money to David Coleman Headley. He facilitated him. He provided logistics. And above all, he knew what this guy was doing. I don't know. If you are in Pakistan and you're doing terrorism, I can understand. The air is such, the water is such, the soil is such that everybody invariably, gravitates towards terrorism. That much I can understand. Yeah, this part is okay. But why would you go to Canada and start the same nonsense that you were doing in Pakistan? I mean, what makes you want to become a terrorist? Do you feel that is the destiny of everybody who has a green passport or at one point in time had a green passport? Now, this guy is obviously Canadian now. You go to a foreign country perhaps for a better life, for a better standard of living. Do that. So when you leave Pakistani airspace, you should leave all this nonsense like jihad and all that, all these, theories which are stupid. Well, they have no place in 21st century world. But the Pakistanis insist, because for them, it's also cultural, by the way. For the Pakistanis, it's not just religious, also cultural. They feel that, like they want to take Pakistani food, they want to take Pakistani music, they want to take Pakistani dance. They also want to take Pakistani terrorism and give it to the rest of the world. Terrorism is actually Pakistani soft power. Such are the times that we live in. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked this video. If you did, press like, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to press the bell icon. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram. Bharat Mata ki Jai.